The following accounts are based on true events, shared by people who swore they would never step into an empty classroom again. These aren't ghost stories meant to scare children. They are testimonies, whispered confessions of students and teachers who experienced something they could never explain. Tonight, you will hear 3 chilling paranormal encounters inside empty classrooms. Story 1. I was 17 the first time I stayed late at school. Exam season. Stress hung over everyone like a thick fog, and our history teacher had given us permission to use the classroom after hours for revision. Most students only stayed an hour or 2 before heading home. But not me. I was desperate for good grades, desperate enough to stay longer, even as the hallways grew quiet and the world outside faded into night. The building always felt different after dark. The chatter of hundreds of students, the slamming of lockers, the squeak of shoes against tile, all of it was gone. What was left was silence. Not peaceful silence. A heavy, suffocating silence. The kind that makes every sound echo too loudly. By 7 p.m., I was the only one left in the classroom. Or at least, I thought I was. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, flickering every so often in that stuttering, half-dead way. The air smelled of chalk dust, dry and sharp, the kind that clings to the back of your throat. I sat at the front, books spread across my desk, flipping pages. The longer I sat there, the more aware I became of how hollow the building felt, how the shadows pooled in the corners of the room like dark water. That's when I heard it, a faint scratching noise. At first, I thought it was just my pencil dragging across paper, but when I froze, the sound kept going. Slow, deliberate, a gritty scrape. My eyes shifted toward the chalkboard. The board was blank. At least, it should have been. But there, near the corner, faint white marks were appearing. Shapes. Letters. I froze, my breath caught in my throat as the chalk moved against the board with no one touching it. It was writing, a shaky line, then another, forming into something unmistakable, my name. Each letter appeared one after the other. J, O, N. I stumbled back from my desk so quickly that my chair screeched against the floor. The sound echoed through the empty halls like a scream. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt. I told myself it had to be a prank. Someone had slipped back in, maybe hiding in the hall, controlling it somehow. But when I rushed to the door and threw it open, the hallway stretched out empty in both directions. Just silence. When I turned back, the chalkboard was still moving. This time, the letters spelled out something else. Don't leave. The chalk dug into the surface so hard that dust rained down onto the ledge. My legs locked in place. My throat was so dry I could barely swallow. I forced myself to walk toward the board, arms shaking as I reached for the eraser. I pressed it against the words, wiping hard, smearing the chalk until the letters disappeared into a cloudy haze. But the moment I pulled the eraser away, the chalk began moving again. Faster this time, jagged, almost angry. Don't leave. Don't leave. Don't leave. Over and over, covering the board, filling it until no space was left. The lights flickered violently. The room dimmed, the buzzing overhead turning into a low, droning hum. My chest tightened, and I realized I wasn't alone. I could see it in the glass. The window by the door reflected the classroom, but in the reflection, there was something standing at the board. A figure, tall, thin, its outline just barely visible like a shadow pressed against the glass. But when I turned around, the board was empty. No one stood there, just the chalk, still scraping across the surface by itself. I couldn't move. My body refused to listen. The only sound was that relentless scratching. Then it stopped. Silence. I let out a shaky breath. My chest burned from holding it in. And then, in the reflection, the shadow turned its head. slowly, directly toward me. That was enough. I ran. I grabbed my bag without even checking if everything was inside and bolted through the door, shoes slamming against the tile as I sprinted down the hall. My footsteps echoed too loudly, chasing me, as if something else was running just behind me. I didn't stop until I was outside, standing under the weak glow of the parking lot lights. My lungs heaved, my heart refused to slow, and when I finally looked back, the school windows were dark, empty. The next morning, I tried to convince myself it was stress, lack of sleep, my brain playing tricks on me. But when I walked past the history classroom, something made me stop. The chalkboard was still covered in words, every inch filled with "don't leave" scratched over and over. And buried between the lines, almost hidden in the mess, was my name, written 3 times. I didn't tell anyone. Not my friends, not the teacher, not even my parents. But I swear, sometimes when the world is quiet and I'm alone with my thoughts, I hear it again. That sound, the faint, steady scratching of chalk. And in the darkness behind my eyes, I see it spell my name once more. Story 2. When I was in high school, I used to get detention all the time. I wasn't a bad kid exactly, just careless. Talking in class, showing up late, forgetting assignments. The kind of stuff teachers hated. Detention became routine. Sit in a classroom for an hour after school, bored out of my mind. Most kids dreaded it. For me, it was just part of life. But there was one detention I'll never forget. One that still keeps me up at night. The night I learned why some doors in the school were always locked. Asterisk, it was late October, a Tuesday. The sky outside was already dark by the time detention started, the kind of early darkness that makes the halls feel endless. The classroom they put us in was on the 2nd floor, near the end of a long hallway. There were 4 of us that day, plus the teacher assigned to watch us. She was one of those teachers who didn't care. She just sat at her desk, reading a magazine, waiting out the clock. The rest of us sat in silence, heads down, pretending to do homework. But as the hour dragged on, I started noticing the sound. A knocking, faint, rhythmic, coming from down the hall. At first, I thought it was just pipes, maybe the building settling. But the sound was too deliberate, too steady. Knock, pause, knock, pause, like someone rapping their knuckles against wood. I glanced at the others, but no one seemed to notice. The teacher didn't look up from her magazine. Finally, curiosity got the better of me. When I raised my hand and asked if I could use the bathroom, she waved me off without even glancing up. So I stepped out into the hall. The air was colder there, carrying that musty, old building smell, dust, floor wax, and something else I couldn't quite place. Something sour. The knocking was louder now, clearer. It was coming from one of the classrooms further down. As I walked toward it, the fluorescent lights overhead buzzed and flickered, casting everything in that sickly yellow glow. Each step echoed, bouncing back from the walls until it felt like someone was walking just behind me. Finally, I reached the source. Room 209. The door was closed, locked with one of those old brass handles. A small rectangular window sat at eye level, covered by blinds that hadn't been opened in years. The knocking came again, sharp and precise. I leaned closer, pressing my ear against the wood. And that's when I heard it. A voice, whispering. At first, it was too faint to make out, just the murmur of syllables sliding together. But the longer I listened, the clearer it became. "Let me out." The words were hoarse, ragged, a voice straining against something. My chest tightened. My hand trembled as I reached for the handle. Of course, it didn't budge. The door was locked tight. Then, the knocking turned violent. Bang, bang, bang. The door rattled against its frame, dust falling from the top like the whole thing might give way. I stumbled back, heart slamming in my chest. From inside, the voice screamed, "Let me out." The sound was so raw, so desperate, It didn't sound human anymore. I ran. I bolted back down the hallway, shoes slapping against the tile, every instinct screaming at me not to look back. By the time I burst into the detention room, my face was pale, my breath ragged. The teacher raised an eyebrow. Bathroom's the other way. I wanted to tell her, to explain what I'd just heard. But when I glanced back toward the hallway, it was silent again, perfectly still. For the rest of detention, I couldn't focus. Every tick of the clock felt like it dragged on forever. And the whole time, I kept waiting for that knocking to start again. When detention ended, the other kids left quickly, laughing, relieved. The teacher was gathering her things. But me? I couldn't resist. I had to know. I walked back down the hallway, my footsteps hesitant. The door to room 209 was still there, locked tight, blinds drawn. No sound. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe stupidity. Maybe curiosity. Maybe something darker. But I leaned close again, pressing my ear to the door. Silence. Then, so faint I almost thought I imagined it, a whisper. "I know your name." I stumbled back like I'd been burned. My throat closed, my skin prickling with cold sweat. I didn't wait. I didn't care. I ran all the way out of the building, down the front steps, into the night air. Later, I asked around about that room. Teachers, students, even the janitor. Nobody gave me a straight answer. Some brushed it off. Some told me the room had been closed for years due to water damage. But others, they just got quiet. Their eyes darted away, like they didn't want to talk about it. I even tried to peek through the window one afternoon when the sun was shining bright and the hallways were full of people. But the blinds were still drawn, thick with dust. Whatever was inside stayed hidden. It's been years since high school, but I still dream about that door sometimes. I'll be walking down that endless hallway. The lights will buzz overhead, and just as I reach room 209, the knocking will start again. Only this time, in the dream, the door opens, and something steps out. Something tall, pale, with eyes too dark to reflect light. And it always smiles at me like it's been waiting. Story 3. There's something about schools at night that just feels wrong. They're built for noise. Hallways filled with footsteps, lockers slamming, voices bouncing off the walls. But when the day ends and everyone leaves, the silence becomes unbearable. It's like the building remembers everything that happened inside it, but it's holding its breath, waiting for something else. I know this better than most because for 2 years, I worked as a student aide in the library, which meant I often stayed late, organizing shelves, logging books, sometimes even closing up after dark. That's when I started seeing her, the girl in the window. Asterisk. It began one Thursday in November. The library was empty. The clock on the wall ticked loud in the silence, and I was shelving a cart of books near the tall windows that overlooked the courtyard. Outside, the last of the daylight was fading. The windows reflected my own image back at me as I worked. My tired face, the books in my arms, the long rows of shelves stretching behind me. And then, for just a second, I thought I saw someone else. A pale face, staring through the glass from outside. I froze, blinking hard. The reflection cleared. Just me. I told myself I was imagining things. That's what you do in empty schools. You see shadows where there aren't any. But the next night, it happened again. This time, I saw her more clearly. She couldn't have been older than 12 or 13. Long black hair, hanging in damp strands around her face. Her eyes, they were wide, too wide, reflecting light that wasn't there. She stood perfectly still on the other side of the glass, her hands pressed flat against it. By the time I turned to face her, she was gone. Just empty glass. Just my reflection staring back at me. I didn't tell anyone at first. Who would believe me? A girl in the window of the second floor? It didn't make sense. But every time I stayed late, I saw her again. Sometimes she'd be closer, her face filling the pain, lips parted like she wanted to say something but couldn't. Other times, she'd be further away, standing in the courtyard below, looking up at me with those unblinking eyes. The worst part wasn't when I saw her. It was when I didn't, because then I started hearing her, soft tapping against the glass like fingernails dragging lightly across it. Sometimes a whisper, so faint I couldn't make out the words. One night, as I was locking up, I swore I heard her say my name. I finally broke down and asked the librarian about it. She was this older woman, always tired, always annoyed. I figured she'd laugh at me, maybe tell me I was losing it. But when I described the girl, the hair, the eyes, the way she pressed her hands against the glass, her face changed. She didn't laugh. She didn't even look surprised. She just said, "You've seen her too?" I swear my blood went cold. The librarian wouldn't say much more, just that students had been talking about the girl for decades. That no one knew who she was or where she came from. Some thought she was the ghost of a student who had died at the school years ago. Others said she never went here at all, that she just appears, watching. And the librarian told me one last thing. Don't look at her for too long. If you hold her gaze, she follows you. After that, I tried to ignore it, try to go about my work without glancing at the windows. But that's easier said than done when you know something is watching you. And one night I slipped. I was shelving books in the history section right near the glass. When I looked up, she was there, closer than ever. Her face pressed against the pane, eyes locked onto mine. I froze. My whole body went rigid. Her lips moved, just slightly, forming a single word. Open. My hand trembled on the shelf. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. Then came a sound, the faint squeak of the window latch. The glass shuddered, vibrating under her touch. I swear I felt the air change, like the barrier between us was thinning. That was enough to break me. I dropped the books and bolted, sprinting across the library, out the doors, down the hall. I didn't stop until I was outside, gasping in the cold night air. After that, I refused to stay late. I made excuses, begged the librarian to let me leave earlier. And for a while it worked, until the night of the storm. Heavy rain, thunder shaking the windows. The librarian had left early, and I was alone trying to finish up fast. When the power flickered, I almost left everything as it was. But then I heard it, the tapping. I turned slowly toward the windows, and she was inside, not outside, not in the courtyard. Inside, standing among the rows of books, dripping water onto the carpet. Her hair hung in wet strands, her clothes clinging to her small frame. And her eyes, God, her eyes were darker than the storm outside. She raised her hand and pointed at me, and she smiled. I don't remember running. I don't remember how I got out. 1 second she was there, and the next I was in the parking lot, my hands shaking so bad I could barely unlock my car. I never went back to that library at night. Even now, years later, I avoid windows after dark. Because sometimes if I catch my reflection just right, I swear I still see her, standing behind me.